Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today our group will present about plutonium injection experiment. But first of all, let me introduce my group mates. Here are my group mates. My name is Nur Iza Atirah. Second presenter is Nurul Dayana. Third presenter is Sharifah Nurul Kausa, and the last one is Nur Nabila Shazwina. So let's proceed to the next point. Did all of you wonder when and where this experiment has been done? Actually, it has been done from April 1945 to July 1947 at United States. Who conduct this experiment? It has been done by doctors and scientists that working with Manhattan Project. Why? Why they did this kinds of experiment? It is because they want to judge the effect of radioactivity on human body. Next, let's see the chronology of the experiment. As for chronology, we will see first recipient injection, Abe Kate, second recipient injection, Albert Stevens, and also third recipient injection, Ada Charlton. First plutonium recipient is Abe Kate, who is a construction worker. He was injured in a traffic accident on his way to work at Oak Ridge. Then he was brought to the hospital to get further treatment. Later on, the scientists had decided to begin the plutonium experiment on him. Wright Langham, who is a chemist, driving force behind the experiment, told the Manhattan Project doctors in Chicago that Kate was already old, so there is a little or no possibility that the injection can have any effect on the normal course of his life. Kate, who is 55 years old, was died 8 years later due to heart attack. Next, for the second plutonium recipient is Albert Stevens, who is house painter. He was injected by Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton at the University of California Hospital in San Francisco because he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Unfortunately, the diagnosis was wrong and Stevens lived another 21 years. For the next 2 decades, scientists collect Stevens' urine to check the amount of plutonium in his body system. Stevens thought that injection that he received as a treatment for his cancer. Stevens lived out his life without knowing that he didn't have cancer and never had it. Third plutonium recipient is Ada Charlton, 49 years old woman. She went to the university hospital with minor ailments. She was injected with plutonium, but she was not terminally ill. In her medical record, they didn't mention anything about the injections. Over a year, Ada suffered from depression, fatigue, arthritis, nausea, and other illness that may or may not have been caused by the plutonium. In 1983, she was died, which is 37 years after the injection. Dr. Christine Waterhouse, who is Ada's doctor, cared for Ada for 29 years without ever telling her that she had been injected with plutonium. Next, I will pass it to Kausa.
To conclude the article, none of the subject was told what was being done, and none gave their consent. They were chosen because the doctors believed them to be mortally ill, although many lived for years, even decades, with the plutonium working its damage in their bodies. The experiment will cover up for 40 years. When they became public, the government apologized, but not a single doctor or hospital was publicly blamed. Next, I will share about the factors that contribute to this issue. The first factor is because the supposedly high-minded people with superiority become too devoted to a goal that it blinds them to simple humanity and misuse their power, which are the scientists that are involved in the experiments. The second factor is because of the government. The government struggle with medical ethics, and it's not that they didn't do anything, they did, but it's often half-hearted attempt to impose guidelines on human experimentation. The government also failed to implement rigid policies governing human experimentation. Later, when the issues start to come into light, the government implement the Wilson policy. The Wilson policy is a policy that opposed to the human experimentation. However, the medical and military critics opposed to the written policy that threatened to restrict human experimentation because they still want to keep going doing the human experimentation. At the witness of the Wilson policy and the other policies that came later was that it was shrouded in secrecy, maybe because of its reference to as the sensitive subject of unconventional warfare. The policy had a top secret designation that prevented it from being properly disseminated among the many agencies involved in human experimentation. Another problem with Wilson's policy was that it failed to adequately address ethical issues. For example, in the policy, it was made clear that there had to be a subject consent but it was vague about how much risk people could be asked to accept in the name of national security research. And lastly is the higher authority. The higher authority requires human dose response data when the agents are considered by the medical authorities to be too dangerous for human experimentation. Overall, I will conclude that the issue happened because of the misuse of power by scientists and high authority, and also because of the incompetent government.
Next, I'm going to talk about the effects of plutonium injection experiments. As we all know, radioactive materials are very dangerous and extremely poisonous. Plutonium is most dangerous when it is inhaled because it emits alpha particles. So when it is inhaled, the particles will lodge in the lung and can kill the lung cells, which cause scarring of the lungs, leading to further lung disease and cancer. Plutonium can enter the bloodstream from the lungs and travel to the kidneys, meaning that the blood and the kidneys will be exposed to the alpha particles, thus the kidney will be damaged. Then, once the plutonium circulates through the body, it concentrates in the liver, spleen, and bones, especially bone marrow and trabecula, which are fibrous or spongy bones. Scientists have taken urinary and fecal sample of the patients to study the urinary and fecal rate of excretion of plutoniums in humans. The results of the sample showed that the plutonium content was relatively low, therefore it was confirmed that the plutonium had deposited in the bone marrow. Furthermore, they also discovered that the absorption of soluble compounds of plutonium through the gastrointestinal tract was very low and essentially no absorption occurred through the skin. This means that the main route to the internal accumulation were absorbed through contaminated wounds or inhalation of dust particles. Lastly, analysis showed little support that any patients died for reasons directly resulting from the plutonium exposure. To support that, based on the outcomes of the experiment, 11 out of 18 patients who were injected with plutonium dies less than 10 years after exposure, which was before any long-term effects would likely have arisen. It is not possible to assume that all patients presented a good health. This is because when the patients received the substantial dose of plutonium, they were already suffering from terminal illnesses at the time of injection, and their lifespans were not necessarily cut short from the radioactive effects of the plutonium. So that's all for the effects that was caused by the plutonium injection experiments.
Next, and the last one is preventive measure that we can take action to avoid this issue from being repeated. The first one is the voluntary consent of the person on whom the experiment is to be performed must be obtained. Like one of our members already told that none of the patient diberitahu them will be injected by plutonium injection. The doctor simply inject them untuk kepentingan research diorang. So all of these things telah langgar undang-undang and doktor tu boleh kena saman atas kesalahan dia. Macam situasi sekarang, mostly semua orang tengah tunggu turn untuk ambil vaksin COVID-19. Vaksin tu atas gunjang kita, tak ada pihak paksa but diorang just will spread awareness ke atas orang yang enggan ambil vaksin. Like kerajaan atau pihak berkuasa tak ada pun main cocok je vaksin tanpa concern pihak terbabit. So, persetujuan pihak yang akan dicocok penting agar boleh mengelakkan hal-hal yang tidak diingini. Next is the experiment must be performed under medical protection and management. Everything yang berkaitan medical kena ada prosedur yang betul and complete equipment to carry out the job. Biasanya sekarang apa-apa hal yang nak dilakukan atas patient, pihak hospital akan minta persetujuan family or waris dahulu. If dah dapat, baru the surgery or related procedure will be proceed. Third is every experiment must be done using animal experimentation or animal testing. The term animal testing refer to procedure performed on living animal for purpose of research into basic biology and disease, assessing the effectiveness of new medicine, products and testing the human health or environment safety. Why they use animal for testing? Because when a new drug or surgical techniques is developed, they find it's unethical to use that technique first in human being because of the possibility that this will cause harm rather than good. Instead, they test in animal to make sure that it's safe and effective. But lately, viral yang animal testing ni kejam. And true, it's cruel because it has too far many damaging consequences for animals, human and environment. So we need to ban certain product yang buat testing on animals sebab this method will torture the animal and then will be suffer and dying. Last but not least is spread awareness about plutonium injection. Langkah yang boleh diambil adalah educate everyone about what is plutonium injection. Apakah kesan dan keburukan daripada injection ini? Plutonium injection ni basically inject the radioactive element in the human. Purpose doing this because they want to know the effect of plutonium towards human body. Like semua orang tahu, radioactive very dangerous and can kill people. So the purpose is unnecessary and too dangerous to do. And nowadays, isu plutonium injection ni dah tak ada because everyone have a knowledge to not kill people alive with radioactive. The last point is tighten the law. Malaysia already have the law about medicinal. So the law need to be tightened agar apa saja kesalahan di dalam bidang perubatan dapat diselesaikan dengan adil dan masalah melakukan apa-apa action kepada pesakit tanpa keizinan dapat diatasi. So 5 point yang saya dah sebut tadi adalah langkah pencegahan agar isu tak beretika seperti ini tidak berulang semula. So that's all from our group about plutonium injection. Thank you.